So who here wants to experience joy? Okay. Who here wants to experience the enduring joy that's something that doesn't pass away? Like we have what we call like ice cream joy, which is we have ice cream, we're joyful about that, but then once it's gone, it's gone. But what Jesus is saying here is he's saying, I want to give you a joy that doesn't end. It doesn't just kind of go up and down. And it's a joy that you can have even in difficult moments, even in sad moments, even in painful moments. You can actually experience joy. It's like, have you ever heard of those underground subterranean rivers in the desert? It's dry on the top, but if you go deeper and deeper, you'll actually find a river underneath the desert. And if we plug into that, no matter how dry it is on the outside, we are nourished, we are filled, and we can actually have joy. You know, Jesus on the cross didn't lose his joy. He was suffering. He was going through a very difficult experience. And yet, he still kept joy in his heart. Now, have you ever heard of the Shroud of Turin before? Do you know what that is? That is what many people believe to be the burial shroud, what Jesus was wrapped in when he was in the tomb. And there's a lot of mystery about it. There's this mysterious face that is on that shroud, if you've ever seen that picture. But when I met someone in the Holy Land in Jerusalem who was studying, he was a professor of studying this shroud. And he said that something that is very unique about that Shroud of Turin, this mysterious image there, is you see all of the wounds. He has lashes all over him. He has all of these brutal scars. And the kind of death that he died, his face should have looked in total anguish. It should have looked disfigured and grotesque. And that's what's recorded in ancient histories about what it looked like when people died on the cross. But when this priest who was studying the shroud said, when I discovered something about going into this face, and he said that this is the only example of someone who looks like he's just asleep, even in the midst of terrible sufferings. And then he said this to me. He said, could possibly the face that we see on the Shroud of Turin actually be the face of someone on the cross who said, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And then this priest said to me, I never knew how much peace was in the heart of Jesus on the cross until I looked at that face. Jesus had joy, and he never lost it. Do you want that kind of joy? The joy that will always endure. The joy that is the river underneath the dryness, underneath the parching heat, underneath the burning sand. How do we receive this joy? Jesus says in the gospel, at the end he says, I'm doing this, I told you this so that my joy might be in you. My joy might be complete, that you might be filled with this underground river. But in order to receive that joy, we have to remain, another word is abide, in his love. We have to stay close to Jesus. We have to stay connected to Jesus. But then how do we do that? Then Jesus says, if you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love. And if you remain, if you abide in my love, then that joy is going to be there. But do you see how we have to start with keeping his commandments? Because that connects us to the power source. That connects us to the river. And then that river flows into us. Sometimes, though, in our maybe way of thinking, we might think of commandments as something that takes away from our freedom. Sometimes we think that commandments are the last thing that's going to give us joy. Sometimes we think, my joy is to do whatever I want, whenever I want, and not have to listen to anyone. And yet we know by example. We know from the commandments of our parents, the commandments of our teachers, the commandments of our coaches, the commandments of our music instructors, the commandments of our dance instructors, whoever it is, these certain rules, commandments of our driving instructors, though you haven't started that probably, but all of those rules actually lead us to experience joy. Because freedom is not necessarily to do whatever I want. Sometimes we think that's what it is. And unfortunately, probably in most songs, in most movies, in most books, most things that you hear in our current day, when we think of freedom, it's, I can do this or this. And that's part of it, but that's not the deepest part. Because yes, we're not robots. We don't just sort of have to do this. We can do this or this. But freedom comes when we do the thing that's excellent, when we do the thing that makes us come alive. When a piano player doesn't look at the piano and just say, I could do whatever I want, so if I want to just hit my head against it, we would look at that and say, you're not going to make beautiful music that way. You have to understand the instrument. You have to understand the rules, in a sense, in order to allow it to come alive. In the comic book strip, you might know this, you might not know this one, Calvin and Hobbes. There's this very famous series called Calvin Ball, in which you play this game, kind of like soccer, or like football, like baseball, but the rules are, there are no rules. You can just do whatever you want. And it might sound like a lot of fun, but at the very end, Calvin and Hobbes, they just get furious at each other, because they're like kicking a goal, and then the other one's like, oh, actually, I just changed the rules, that actually means that it's a point for me instead of for you. And it just goes on like that. We're driving on the road. If there's no rules, then someone can play bumper cars with you for fun. And that would not be a fun experience. So the Lord wants to give this to us on a deeper level. If this is true in the world of music, in the world of sports, in the world of all these different things, how much more is it for God? Because God built you. He knows every single cell in your body. He handcrafted every single one of them. He knows everything about your heart more than you do. And He knows exactly what will make you come alive. He knows what will give you joy. And this is where we really need to ask the Lord for trust, because it's really about trusting, because there's something in our heart that we kind of push back against rules. We want to do it our own way. And sometimes we, in a sense, push back and say, this will make me happier. And yet, what the Lord is saying is, keep my commandments. I've given you the rule book, in a sense, for how to live, how to experience life. And the more that we enter into that, we actually can learn how to remain in God's love. And it's there that we then tap into the underground river of the Holy Spirit that will give us that joy that never, ever goes away.